Hey there, Heather Ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. And today we are going to be looking at the top 10 Olympic hockey moments of all time. Hockey is a big part of the Winter Olympics. Well, if you're Canadian, it's like just as much as skiing, snowboarding, and curling, obviously. But today we're going to be looking at the top 10 Winter Olympics hockey moments of all time. Well, of course, the Olympics are always in well, hockey's always in the Olympics in the winter. I mean, the Summer Olympics, there is a hockey called field hockey, but that's way different. Anyhow, let's look at the top 10 hockey moments. There are men and there are women events, if you must know. Number 10 is Russia winning gold at Pyeongchang 2018 for the men's hockey team. The Russian hockey team had won gold in 92 as a unified team. Of course, that was when the breakup of the Soviet Union happened. And people like Lithuania, Estonia, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, among others, were formed. Anyhow, the Russian hockey team had not won gold since 92. 98, they were close, but the Czechs beat them in a shocker. They fell to the Americans in the semifinals in 2002 and couldn't deliver it in 06, 10, or 14. In 2018, in Pyeongchang in South Korea, they wanted to win gold. Unfortunately, they would have to be called the Olympic athletes from Russia, or OAR, like a boat or for short. Due to the sanctions because of the drug testing problems, they took on Germany, who shocked Canada in the semifinals of the tournament. And like Canada, almost every time we head to Asia for the Olympics, we kind of suck at hockey. Nevertheless, Russia beat Germany and they won gold. So, it was the first men's hockey medal in 26 years. That's good. Number 9 is the big win for Finland, winning the bronze in Pyeongchang 2018. Speaking of, usually the women's tournament would have Canada, US, Sweden. It was almost always that way Canada, US, Sweden in any of those formats. But unfortunately for Finland upset the competitive balance, taking bronze, which was dramatic. Finally, getting the competitiveness of women's hockey because there were rumors circulating that women's hockey was going to be kicked off the Olympic program because it was always Canada facing the United States in the final, except for that one time in 2002. 2010. Number 8 is Belarus's win over Sweden in 2002 in the men's tournament. So Belarus was a decent hockey team. So was Sweden. Sweden dominated the group stage, the group that Canada was in, because Sweden handed Canada a 5-2 loss, and Canada had to climb ever so higher to try to do what they did and all that. So anyhow, as I take a look at it, so Belarus would beat Sweden. Right, so Sweden would face Belarus with an easy path to the semifinals, where they would eventually probably would have faced Canada again. However, Belarus came up firing. It was 3-3 when Vladimir Kolpat had a seemingly innocent shot from center ice and knocked off of Tommy Salo's mask and into the net behind him. And Belarus had won the game 4-3. It was a massive shock. And the good news for Canada was that they didn't have to worry about Sweden. They could worry about Belarus and get themselves to the gold medal game. We'll talk about that in a little while. Number 7 on the list is the Canadian women's gold medal in 2002. The fact of the matter was that Canada, after losing in 98 to the Americanos, wanted revenge. And they did. They would put up a predictable round robin, do well, and then get to the final against the Americans. It was a tight game on that Thursday night. Canada won the game 3-1. It was a close one, or 3-2. Sorry, but nevertheless, Canada had the reasons. But unfortunately, an American referee, actually called many penalties against Canada, like consecutively. A lot of people said that it was kind of biased because weren't wasn't the referee supposed to be from a country that did not have the final, we're not in the finals or all that, we're not playing because of competitive balance. But anyway, that referee made several calls, gave America a lot of power plays, but it didn't work. Canada beat those pesky Americans. And then Haley Wickenheiser, after the game, after learning that the American team had a Canadian flag and was stomping on it, said basically, they should give us that flag. We'll autograph it for them. Number 6 was Canada winning gold in the men's in 2002. If you think Canada's women's gold was the big story of 2002 for hockey, think again. Canada's men were trying to prove it. Thumbs up. 1952 was the last time Canada won a gold medal in hockey, which was shocking because, it's not a national sport. But, of course, those pesky Soviets. We'll talk about the Soviets. Yeah. And the Soviets were dominating and all that. So Canada, this was the second time NHLers were allowed to play in the Olympics. In '98, they had a disastrous semifinal against the Czech Republic and then lost to Finland for bronze because they were disheartened, enchanted. So Canada won gold in 2002, and they lost to Sweden 5-2. They tied Czechia at 3-3, and basically Gretzky went on a massive rant saying that everyone wanted Canada to lose. The American media wanted Canada to lose. The referees wanted Canada to lose. And that actually spurred Canada on. A couple of wins later, they got to the semifinals where Belarus was winning instead of Sweden because of what I said earlier, Belarus being Sweden. So what happens? Canada wins the game over Belarus quite easily, 7-1. U.S. beat Russia in the other semifinals, so it was Canada-U.S., just like things should be on American soil in Salt Lake City. Canada got off to a decent start, and then Joe Sakic finished off with a minute and a half left and went 5-2, and Canada won the gold. And finally, our drought was over. Number 5 was Sweden's gold medal in 2006 at Torino. Canada went to Torino to qualify and try to win their second straight gold medal in hockey. Unfortunately, though, Canada had a problem. They could beat opponents in one rink, and in the other rink in Torino, they couldn't win. So it was strange having two rinks, like for the men. But unfortunately, Canada got shut out in one arena, and then they were dominating in the other one. They found the magic touch. Sweden would go on to play Finland in a thrilling final. There was cause of concern because of Finland Sweden in the preliminaries playing to a cautious game in which it screwed some teams over. Nevertheless, Sweden beat Finland 3-2. Forsberg and Lindstrom winning the leadership. And my notes are wrong because it wasn't their first men's gold because '94 they won gold. I should have put Peter Forsberg's. Yeah, technically Peter Forsberg's shootout move should be number 5 on the list because he did that famous shootout against Corey Hirsch of Canada with that backhand and all that. Canada could not contain themselves, and Sweden were the gold medal champions. Of course, Forsberg's move would be put on a postage stamp, and Corey Hirsch did not give consent to use his likeness, so they had to put him in a blue sweater with number 11, which kind of did not make sense. Number 4 is Canada winning the women's gold in 2014. This was one of the biggest moments in hockey history. The Canadian women would play the United States again in the final. It seemed like it was a rite of passage. Canada were down by 2 goals in the third period, and it looked like the Americans were going to win the gold. But Canada pulled off a rally thanks to Millie Philippe-Poulin's tying goal. And then in overtime, with the American women being 1 down, Canada scored on a cautious passing play. Millie Philippe-Poulin again scored the goal. And Canada would go on to win the gold, obviously. So this was an amazing moment. It was such a big moment that, British TV parodied it with, Tim and Sid from Sportsnet doing their podcast, and then Canada winning the gold, and then they basically said, knock, knock, who's there? Gold medal to the face. Anyway, number 3 is the woman getting into the Olympics with women's hockey, 1998. It was amazing and all of that. That the women were going to get their moment in the sun. 1990 was the first official Women's World Championship. And then in 1998, the women were going to be competing in the Olympics. Well, of course, the NHL men would do that in 98 and then off and on for years. But anyway, Canada, US for gold. It was just major and all that. The Americans won the gold in Japan, but Canada would dominate for more gold medals. Number 2 is the golden goal from 2010, Canada versus the United States. It always seems that Canada and the United States were doomed to face each other. They were paired in the same preliminary round, which the Americans beat Canada, making America get a bye into the quarterfinals, meaning Canada had to qualify. And Canada did. Canada ended up qualifying by beating Germany, and then I can't remember who they beat in the. I think the quarterfinals against Russia. Yeah, Canada crushed Russia in the quarterfinals, which was shocking because how good Russia was. And then Canada took on Slovakia in the semifinals, and it almost was a Slovakian miracle to force the game into overtime as Pavel Dimitra, who was playing for the Vancouver Canucks at the time, for Slovakia, shot, it hit the right post past Roberto Luongo, but it didn't go in the net. And that was so close. Canada skated by the skin of their chins. And then came the gold medal game against those pesky Americans. Canada was up 2 late, but then Zach Parise scored a key goal to tie the game at 2. We went to overtime, and then Canada ended up winning with 7.5 minutes gone. We can all remember watching it and then hearing Sidney Crosby, number 87, shout, Iggy! And then Jerome McGinley passing the puck, scored in the net. And it was a golden goal for all time as Sidney Crosby did his job. And Canada could separate coast to coast. Ironically enough, I actually had to work at Sellers that day and all that, and would get updates and all that, as Canada would win the gold medal. And number 1 is the Miracle on Ice, USA Russia 1980, or the Soviets. It was a tough time for the Olympics in Lake Placid in 1980 because just a few months before that, the Russians would invade Afghanistan, and then you had the Iran hostage crisis. America was down low, very low. And rumors were circulating that the Americans were going to probably ban the Americans from the Winter Olympics, but there was just too little time. So the Soviets were going to the Olympics in Salt Lake City, and people were not, in Lake Placid, and people were not too pleased with it. So, of course, under the cloud of US-Russia tensions boiling over, the Americans men's hockey team would start big. Basically, they were full of college players because of the amateur rules and all that. And Herb Brooks from the University of Minnesota took some of his University of Minnesota men and then other college players from around the nation to bring it. If you watch the movie Miracle with Kurt Russell, the one in 2003, it's actually quite good and all that. The Soviets played the Americans in an exhibition game, walled them 10-3, and basically America was down and out. Also, the Americans played Norway to a 3-3 tie in an exhibition, and Herb Brooks made them bag skate for a few hours. And then Mike Ruzioni, or was it Mark Johnson, basically went into Herb Brooks' face and basically said, I play for the United States of America. And then Herb was so moved, he stopped the skate. But yeah, the Americans, their road to the final was huge. They faced Sweden, and then Buzz Schneider, with under a minute left, scored a key goal against Sweden, Pelle Lindbergh, tied the game, and of course, no overtime. The Americans would get into the medal rounds with Russia, Finland, and Sweden. Now, the rules were that because the Americans already played Sweden in their pool, that game they didn't have to play Sweden again. So they would have to play the Soviets, then Finland. Of course, the US-Soviet game was huge and all that. But unfortunately, ABC, who had the Olympics at the time, decided to tape delay the game to 8 o'clock instead of showing it live at 5:30, thinking that the Americans were going to get walloped. Well, that didn't change. So the Miracle on Ice happened. The Soviets were up 2-1 at a point, and then a long shot late in the first period. Tretiak gives up the rebound. The Americans score 2-2, and then Coach Tikhonov benched Tretiak for Michigan. Russia was up 3-2, and then America scored a couple goals, including the Mike Erozioni goal. And then Al Michaels, that was when he for ABC alongside the late Ken Dryden would say, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. And it was just unbelievable. And it's also unbelievable that Ken Dryden would be the color commentator. But anyway, the Americans did their job. They beat the Russians. Now, of course, the public perception was, well, of course, the Soviets using their powerhouse and their quote unquote amateur status. But people think that that was the gold medal. Actually, false. That is completely false. That was in the preliminary round. The Americans still had to face Finland, and they lost. They could have been as worse as bronze. So after Finland had a 2-1 lead in the second period, Herb Brooks in the dressing room before the third period against Finland said, "If you don't win this game, you'll take this loss to your fucking graves. Your fucking graves." That's what he said. Fortunately, though, the Americans pulled it off, winning 4-2, getting the gold medal and relegating the Russians to silver. So, it was basically American ice. Do you believe in miracles? Yes, you should. You really should. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.